Welcome to Conversations with Leaders in Luxury. I'm Greg Furman, founder and chairman of the Luxury Marketing Council. Since 1994, 1,000 luxury brands in 57 cities worldwide, some 5,000 CEOs and CMOs. Today, I have the privilege of being with JP Coolwine, who is the EVP of Marketing for Frederick Fekkai, and author, long-standing consultant, and friend of the family through Frederick. JP, great to have you here with us.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks for spending some time
Pleasure
with
to
us.
be here.
And I also have to say thank you to everybody at NASDAQ for their ongoing support and patronage and production support of the Luxury Marketing Council. We couldn't do this without them. JP, great to be with you. So tell us a little bit about your education en France, which is a natural focus on toutes les choses luxe, luxury. And a little bit of what got you from France to here, to your books, to your relationship with Frederick, just to set the stage.
Absolutely. How much time do you have?
Well, we have a couple of days.
So it's been a long story. I've always had a a special place for France in my heart. Already started with my father actually going to France for study. So I followed in his footsteps.
But did you grow up in Germany?
I grew up in Germany and in Tunisia, where my father was working for Lacoste, actually, producing their famous polo shirts, Tunisia, Morocco, etc.
A very dear friend of mine, Dawn Mello, who was the eye of the store at Bergdorf Goodman twice, was a key consultant to Lacoste.
Yes.
So I know them well, and they've always been great.
This was in the 70s when most of textile industry was moving out into North Africa and then into Asia.
Yes.
So always had a special place for French and French culture, and then went to school, high school in France, did my baccalaureate there, and then went to college in France.
L'École Supérieure.
L'École Supérieure de Commerce in Reims, which of course was sponsored by champagne houses. So instead of drinking beer, we regularly drank champagne for our student parties.
Well, tough duty, but somebody has to do it.
Absolutely. So from there, also studied in England, a little bit in Portugal, of course in Germany, and then started with Procter & Gamble and went international from there.
Well, you know, I think one of the things that we would both agree on is that in the evolution of luxury, and I was in the in 1991, one of the first people in the luxury business to be transplanted from, at the time I was at J. Walter Thompson, in the oil industry at the stock exchange and then JWT, to be brought into a luxury brand to do marketing, not because my roots were luxury, but because what they wanted was somebody that had classic packaged goods strategic experience. So your Procter & Gamble experience, as was mine corporately, were prescient in terms of the way luxury brands now, looking with full 2020 vision, are perceiving marketing. So your experience with Procter & Gamble and mine probably have some parallel tracks, because the brands, the luxury brands, are finally realizing they can't just say we tell them what to wear, but they have to adopt classic packaged goods marketing techniques.
I think both industries learn from each other.
Yes.
I became interested in luxury because luxury marketing, to some extent, is like the highest form of marketing. You don't really have a higher performing product, or it's mostly about dreams, it's about stories, etc. On the other hand, the luxury industry has become very corporate, very numbers based, very growth every quarter. So they had to also learn from the big CPG companies in terms of how do you do that? How do you roll out internationally? How do you deliver initiatives, etc. And
more in our history, within the luxury arena, beholden to the shareholder, as more and more families have gone public, whereby they are responsible on a shorter term basis and are making decisions very differently as a consequence of that.
Absolutely. And that's actually part of the story we look at in the book. It all started with craftsmanship and artisans and family companies. Then it became very corporate, of course, the big groups, LVMH, Kering, and so on, but also quite a few family companies transformed themselves. But now we almost see a step back again.
Let us pause for 1 second. And I don't want to ignore Frederick Fekkai, who I've known since my days at Bergdorf and just think the world of, who also has been through a number of changes. You have to give him my best regards, and maybe he and I can do one of these. But talk briefly about your role as EVP within Frederick Fekkai, and for people who don't know him, probably not people, most people in New York know him.
Will know him,
Will know him, but for those that see this outside of New York, say a little bit about your role there and Frederick Fekkai.
Yeah, so I met Frederick in Hong Kong actually, when we launched the Frederick Fekkai business in Hong Kong and for Asia, which was a great success and was great fun. We flew around in helicopter, he loves helicopters. A lot of good eating and meeting a lot of interesting people in Hong Kong, of course. And we got along very well. And then the job here to lead the brand opened up very unexpectedly. And they called me literally at night because of the time difference and said, what would you think about, you know, coming over to New York and lead the Fekkai business? And it took me about a minute or so to
What year are we
say
in
yes.
now? When
2013.
Okay, so relatively recently.
Yeah, so I had worked with Frederick for 4 years now in total. And he's, of course, absolutely fantastic
he's a
person.
prince, total prince.
And he is his brand, which I always say, if you had to summarize the brand in one word, it would be charmer.
Yeah.
Charmer, he is, on every level.
And at the level of his métier, completely forward-thinking and adopting new techniques and styles. And
so actually, to our earlier subject, I mean, Frederick invented luxury hair care. Which is another trend that is going on. Luxury used to be watches and cars. More and more we see luxury go into CPG areas and into service areas. So Frederick was there. He had this fantastic salon at Bergdorf that you're very familiar with. And he invented the concept of the luxury salon. And then he invented the concept of selling hair care like skincare and luxury just downstairs at Bergdorf and all other department stores, which was revolutionary at the time because yes, Chanel and others were there with cosmetics and skincare, but nobody ever had
fully integrated.
Yes, nobody ever had hair care. That was something for the supermarkets.
Right, right.
So you see the extension here of luxury into different domains.
Well, so back to where we were, but that's a great introduction, and we'll get him to spend a little time with us perhaps here.
I will work my best.
All right, I'm sure you'll make it.
Here.
I'm sure you'll make it happen. So where you were going was, we were talking about the broad change of ethic in the way in which brands look at luxury marketing, and the way you as an author perceive the sea change.
Yes.
And there's a lot of pieces to that. So talk about the book a little bit, what inspired you to write it.
Right. So Wolfgang Schäfer is a good buddy of mine in an agency, Select New York, and we've been fascinated with all these small emerging brands that people love so much they literally forget about pricing. Doesn't mean that they're enormously expensive, but if you think about it, spending $15, $20 on a fruit juice is actually quite extortionist, okay? Really extracting a maximum value, but people don't feel like that. And the same about sweaters, and the same about vodka, and the same about you know, other goods. We even found toilet paper and salt. We made it almost a game.
Or handmade
water,
mice for computers,
salt, whatever. So we said, why is it? How come people, you know, forget so much about price and performance and really get enrolled in a brand?
And the title of the book is Rethinking Prestige Brands, The Secrets of
the
Branding. Rethinking Prestige Branding, The Secrets of Ueber-Brands.
Right. And we wanted to make it just about Uber-Brands, but our editor said, you know, maybe we should have something that you can Google and you can search. So he started it with Rethinking Prestige Branding.
But it's to the point you made earlier, which is mass can learn from class, and class has a lot to learn from mass.
Absolutely. And these Uber-Brands, they don't get stuck in these definitions of luxury, premium, masstige, whatever you want. What they're all about is they're creating a world that people want to be part of, that people want to adopt, that people want to shape. And as I said, they're making the utilitarian benefits and the concept of cost and return and so on less of a focus. So when I buy, you know, a Yuan soap, which is an Asian hand-formed soap, I'm not buying a soap to wash my hands. I'm buying into an entire concept of reviving revitalizing traditional Chinese medicine,
Cultural experience.
sourcing, from the roots, literally in a national park, and so on and so on. When I buy Brunello Cucinelli sweater, and I'm an insider and I'm an influencer, I buy an entire, literally, philosophy of Renaissance patronage and reviving the crafts. When I buy Petit H, the little daughter, literally, of Hermès, I'm buying into sustainability and recycling, executed in an Hermès way. And that's what we found fascinating. It's so much more than raw materials and provenance, and this is made of gold, or this can go 300 miles an hour.
Well, Mr. Stanley Marcus, who I miss more every day, my father's name happened to be Stanley as well, was a dear friend and great mentor, and he always used to say his definition of luxury was the best that the mind of man can imagine and the hand of man create. And he always used that both as pertains to product, but also he saw service as a product. And the other thing I would say to you is that when luxury brands look at, when I talk to CEOs of luxury brands and say, what keeps you awake at night? They routinely, for the entire 21-year history of the Luxury Marketing Council, say to me, educating the best customer about the price-value equation. So once they understand the dream, the story, the inherent value of manufacture of product and or service, price becomes no object.
Right. I think, actually, I dislike the word education.
Yeah,
because it's very didactic.
I take your point, yes, yeah.
And what we find the best brands to do is make it effortless.
I should have said in a sophisticated,
right,
non-condescending way. But I take your point.
Make it a story.
Yes.
Make it a story. Make it something you can wrap your mind around it. But don't be didactic about it.
Yes.
And don't be very functional about it.
Yeah, wagging your finger or talking down over your pince-nez.
Yeah. So, a Chanel exposition at the Art Museum in Beijing about Coco Chanel does the education in a way that is perceived as a cultural event people queue up for.
Sophisticated, non-condescending, experiential.
Right. The other thing that we noticed is, classically, traditionally, you talk a lot about service in the store, about the representatives in the store and how they talk to consumers, etc. Now, there's also a lot to think about the community and how it generates its own content and its own community. And that is something that a lot of traditional luxury brands struggle with because they don't want to lose control. The definition was, we control, we are the brand.
Yes.
And still doing that while allowing your biggest fans to be part of it is something that the new luxury brands master.
Well, I mean, it's no surprise to especially young folk, but to people that are classic marketers, strategic marketers, to understand that the paradigm has shifted from push, control the message, to pull, to engaging a community, to inspiring groups of ambassadors to promote and tell the story of the brand and be inspired by the experience of the brand. And the whole impact of social networking and media and what means PR and marketing. I'm sure you talk about that in what you're doing. Why don't you talk a little bit about that from the perspective of your book?
Right. So there are two concepts in the book. We have 7 principles in the book, but there are 2 concepts that are about marketing in this sense. One is, we actually talk about unselling versus selling, just to put the emphasis on, if it feels like selling, if it looks like selling, it's probably not going to work in this context. So what do brands rather do? Let's say Nespresso and George Clooney, to use a modern Uber brand. You pay more for a cup of Nespresso that you make at home than you pay at Starbucks, and that was already an achievement over the average cost of a cup.
When I was in
so
the
I call it a luxury.
When I was on the agency side, we had them as an account for a while. So it's a very interesting example.
It's in-home luxury. So they use George Clooney in Europe, but they don't use them in the classic sense of, I'm the celebrity, look at me, I endorse Nespresso. On the contrary, the background story is that the Nespresso Club members, because you can only order it from the club, not in the supermarket, feeling of belonging, special, playing with,
the capsules.
Exactly. The club members voted on who would be a good representative of the club. they got to decide that they thought George Clooney would be pretty good. So George Clooney was allowed to apply.
Right.
I'm exaggerating.
No, I understand, but yeah.
Then in the ads, you have ads like George Clooney holding the cup. The focus is on the cup, but he is all blurry.
Right.
And they say Nespresso, what else? Meaning, George Clooney is a guest to Nespresso.
Yes.
He's an aficionado, he likes this coffee. The ads on TV replicate that. A lady would come to a Nespresso club, hand George Clooney the keys, and walk in because she thinks he's the cowboy, and goes on and so on.
Right.
So again, showing that the brand is at a higher level than the celebrity versus the celebrity, kind of positioning the brand.
Well, your point about
selling the brand.
The members of the club voting on who should represent the image
puts them in power.
is an example of what I'm starting to see more and more happening, which is that in the old days, brands didn't believe that customer councils, that any best customer, somebody spending $750,000 on apparel at Bergdorf Goodman, for example, would deign to spend 2 hours of a lunch talking about their views of the catalog business.
Right.
Bergdorf as one example. But more and more brands now are engaging small groups of the elite customers to get that kind of marketing advice and bring them in as strategic partners qualitatively.
Absolutely. And you need these evangelists, you need these super users. They spread your message and they make the brand authentic. So one concept is unselling. The other concept is to play with longing and belonging. So on the one hand, we're talking about belonging here and the Nespresso Club, for example. On the other hand, you still cannot abandon the concept of longing, meaning you never quite get there. Because once you fully have the brand and you think you're in control, that's when you lose it as a brand. So you need to constantly play between the two. It's like Studio 54 in the good old days where you have a velvet rope and who's in or out, literally, physically as well as socially, who's hip, is decided by the doorman. Actually, the more randomly the decision becomes, the more aspiring and desirable it is to get in. You need to constantly play with that velvet rope.
In the book, do you have an example of this trend in terms of who's using it to their benefit?
So I personally, I love Berluti as an example where they have this event where they bring in great customers of theirs for dinner. So it starts like a regular, quite posh dinner, champagne,
20,
everything.
15, 20 people?
Lots of courses, probably between 20 and 50 people.
Yeah, intimate by big brand events.
And ideally Olga Berluti also being present. And so they eat, etc. And then towards the end, it gets a little weird for the outsider. They all take off their shoes, which are obviously Berluti shoes, put them on the table, take their napkins, white napkins, take a bit of the champagne, Dom Pérignon, no less, and Berluti shoe cream, and start polishing their shoes. Then they walk outside into the moonlight and put the shoes down to shine them in the moon. The sun would be too strong and bleach them, but the moon is right for the shoes.
That's great.
You can imagine
it's
what
kind of like Japanese-Italian, right? It's a moon viewing platform. I love it.
So you can imagine what that creates in terms of a sense of belonging, in terms of word of mouth, in terms of the longing to be part of, get invited. I mean, you now long to be invited to such a party. So that is the modern form of playing this longing.
It's like the making sacred of the product under the great moon, you know? And
they have many aspects. They have the Windsor knot. They teach, in this case, their customers to make a Windsor knot for their shoes. The legend is that, the House of Windsor knots it this way to avoid, moments where they might have to bend down to re-knot their shoes and get a photograph taken or whatever. So Olga Berluti is teaching that, and so the insiders would recognize each other as being the true Berluti kind of community by looking at the knot in their shoes.
That's a great example. I love that. The other one I was going to talk to you about that I thought was really interesting was your piece on Cirque du Soleil and Grey Goose. They struck me as interesting examples. And
So I think, again, these are great examples because a transformation of a mass business or a commodity. Circus was nothing special, $20 a ticket. Barnum was the big kid on the block. Vodka was the liquor that was the lowest rank. Yes, there was Absolute, but other than that...
Yeah, they were the first to brand it properly.
Exactly. So vodka was a commodity.
Yeah, and Circus and vodka that way were very, very mass.
Yes. And the vodka was, you know, spike anything with it. It didn't matter. It had no taste.
Right. It was not a sipping drink.
So here comes Sidney Franks, I think is his name, and says, let me put that concept on its head. Create a vodka from France, not from Scandinavia or Russia, from a castle with an enologue who kind of selects only the best grains, and so on, and make it the best tasting vodka of the world, made in France, just like champagne, just like cognac. And you know the rest of the story. Basically, a $2 billion business sold, I think, for $8 billion to Bacardi. Today, if you go into a duty-free store, the luxury or the high-end vodkas never end. I mean, it's a shelf that never ends. A total transformation. Vodkas were nothing. Right. Now they take as much space as
And they
champagne.
were, from a brand segment perspective, they spearheaded the whole concept of the ability of a brand that had a stake, let's say in an expensive scotch or an expensive bourbon, to take it to the ether.
Yes, yes. And of course, you can't quite control how it's going to go, so I'm not sure that, you know, hip-hop artist tie-in was planned, but they certainly knew how to leverage that.
Yeah.
They had
Well, they flowed with it.
Oh, absolutely.
It was like Timberland when they were adopted by the rap community with all their gorgeous wilderness ads. Nobody, but they went with it.
Absolutely, they went with it. And they had other elements that are more planned, like the best tasting vodka is voted by a culinary institute that I think is actually owned or created or sponsored by the vodka itself. So some left to chance and harnessed, and some really, really planned. And then Cirque du Soleil, I mean, this circus is great because it's a mythical place, right? I mean, there's stories being told without saying a single word. It's beautiful, and I talked to Cirque du Soleil, and they said they never know in the audience. Some people engage just on a visual level and have a good time in the entertainment. And a lot of people, they say sometimes frighteningly, interpret a lot into these stories and become really involved and relive them, etc. So circus was about clowns and about wild animals. Those two are not at Cirque du Soleil, at least not in the classic form. And yet it has created a circus where $400 for a ticket is not rare.
Acceptable. Yeah. If you were to be talking to CEOs now, today, and say to them, here's 4 or 5 things right now that they should consider from a luxury marketing standpoint that they may not have on their radar, what would be the areas that you would say a brand, even a solid brand that's doing it well, should think about?
Right. First of all, I think, is to think about what their brand is and what their company is, importantly. So their brand and the organization behind it, beyond the material part. What are you beyond the shoe, beyond the yogurt, beyond the suit, on a human level? Because that is what people really subscribe to as well. It doesn't need to be, you know, I'm a social activist, even though that has worked pretty well for Patagonia or for Ben & Jerry's, call it, okay? Or you know, to fight for sustainability. We had the Hermes example. But it needs to be something that is more than just ownership of a thing, of stuff. And then the second aspect to that is, you know, does your organization really live up to that? And ideally, it should be a natural. It shouldn't come as something that is forced. And so this myth and this mission should really be lived. They should be living it, which is one of our principles. The next one then is to truly understand who is what we call the design target. See, there is users, and then there's a design target. I love to take Harley-Davidson as an example there. You know, Harley-Davidson, if you think about the design target, they have a beard, a bigger one than us. Yeah. They have a black leather jacket. Yeah. They have tattoos. They smoke. When I ask people, tell me who is the Harley-Davidson person.
Right.
Everyone has a very, very clear image.
When I was at the stock exchange, they listed, and we had a cavalcade of 200 bikers, half of which were stereotypical, half of which were corporate bikers. And to your point, it's a very diverse community.
Absolutely, and it's a great example. So the design target are those Hell's Angel-like looking guys on their bikes,
Right.
who spend all their life on these bikes. They are not the people who buy these expensive Harley bikes, particularly in the quantities that are needed by the Harley-Davidson company to make money.
Right.
Those are the people who then want to be like these
The
people.
aspirational executive.
The people who are free, the outlaws.
Right.
And they want to be the outlaw for the weekend. They put on the temporary tattoo,
Right.
their nice leather jacket that cost them
Right.
an enormous amount of money, and their customized Harley
Hog.
that they didn't touch themselves. They
Right.
wouldn't know how to repair themselves,
Right,
but
right.
customized.
Yes,
And they go out there and they feel like the strategic, like this design target,
certain
but they're
wildness.
the users.
Right, right.
So that is important for brands to think through. If they only focus on the user,
Yes.
they will make the Harley safe for family outings because the wife is, nervous about her husband going out for the weekend
Right.
because he really
Right.
is an office guy. He's not one of those wild
Right.
guys. It would go the wrong way.
Yes.
So you need to be aware of your design target and
Yes.
your user, and they can be very different personalities.
Yes.
And then, of course, the concepts we talked about earlier, longing versus belonging, unselling.
Expound just a little bit. We have only a few more minutes, but expound on the longing concept.
So let's stay with Berluti.
Yeah.
These club events, only the very special people get access, which are basically high-paying customers, and then, of course, editors, bloggers nowadays, other influencers. So they're in. And then you have, though, the very broad community. This is being not pushed out to, that's usually the word,
Yes.
but it kind of snowballs out there. This is the role of the internet and kind of the luxury brands also that understand the internet and how to work it for this longing versus belonging. You have your fashion show, you have your exclusive event, you have your meetup of the hogs, of the mini users,
Right.
you have the outing of the Patagonia surfers, whatever. There's only a few who can be there. There are only a few that are allowed in, but everyone can see it. Just like in the old days when you had to line up at the Astoria Hotel to get into the restaurant,
Right.
only 10% made it, a lot more stood in line, and a lot more yet drove by to see the line,
Right.
which creates the image of the Astoria Hotel. Look at Hermes shops in Hong Kong or Louis Vuitton stores. It's not really about safety or shop flow that there is a line every time and that there is a physical velvet rope. It's also for all the people walking past.
Right, right. It's theater a little bit.
Yes. So that theater, whether it's in the internet or on the internet or whether it's on the street, it still applies.
Well, I regret that a half hour goes by so quickly. We'll have to do part two. Maybe we can get
With Frédéric.
part two for us and Frederic, part
Yes.
2 and 3. And last question, when you from two last questions. What's your personal definition of luxury, and what do you do to kind of decompress, find your center so that you recharge your batteries and do what you do so well?
My personal definition of luxury is a lunch with friends that moves into becoming a dinner and that moves into becoming a long night dancing, even though it wasn't planned.
Right.
And that might involve luxury products, particularly of the food kind.
Right.
But what is the luxury is like to totally take your mind away and just indulge in the company and in the moment. That's true luxury for me.
That's good.
Decompressing, I did that yesterday. Decompressing is drag my sailboat down to the Long Island Sound
Nice.
and go sailing.
Nice. Beautiful. Well, JP, it's been a real treat to spend some time with you. I
My
thank you so
pleasure.
much. And I thank you all for joining us today with JP Coolwine, EVP at Frédéric Fekkai, and author of Rethinking Prestige Branding, The Secrets of Ueber-Brands. Thank you for joining us, and big thanks, as always, to our friends at NASDAQ for their patronage, and producing our continuing series of conversations with leaders in luxury.